The scoped rifles have went from being completely overpowered to being kind of a niche thing that people don't really use anymore. Which begs the question, what is the point of these guns? So let's have a brief rundown of the history of these two guns. In 2014, both guns had their fire rates buff. I think the AUG went to like around 700 and the SG went to 666. The CSGO dev team found out that this was way too much for the AUG, so they nerfed it back to 666 for the AUG and increased its recoil. Both guns would continue to get minor changes to their scopes, like scoped run speed being reduced and scoped visuals being improved. In 2018, the AUG and the SG had very severely reduced prices, and this was around the time that you started seeing a bunch of AUG and SG breaking the meta videos. So this makes a lot of sense considering these are such severe price drops. The SG cost barely any more than the AK now, and the AUG costs barely more than the M4. You can see just how broken this is. The SG at this point still had a fire rate of 666, meaning that for basically the price of an AK, as $50 barely matters, you had a more accurate gun with an easier to control recoil pattern and a faster fire rate. And for the price of an M4A4, you can get an M4A4 with more accuracy, damage, and a scope. The AUG was not as game-breaking as the SG was at this point, as the M4A1S was also very strong at this time, if I remember correctly, but this price reduction instantly put them both in the meta. In March of 2019, the devs came to their senses and reverted the AUG's price, now that everybody was using it. Oddly enough, even with their increased stats, people never used these guns before this extreme buff. Even though they actually were pretty good, the AUG costed 200 more than its non-scoped counterpart, the M4A4, and offered more damage plus better accuracy. And the AUG can also one-tap to the head at close ranges, unlike the M4, which is kind of odd. And the SG costed 300 more than its non-scoped counterpart, but had a faster fire rate with more accuracy. You gotta understand though, Counter-Strike players hate change, so it took a buff this extreme to get people to use the guns. Back to March of 2019, now that people knew how good the AUG and the SG were, they had to nerf it, but really enough, they only nerfed the AUG. It took 8 more months until on November of 2019, they finally nerfed the SG2 and brought its price back to 3,000. Personally, I think it was fine at this point. Both guns cost more than their full buy counterparts, but were more powerful and had scopes, which I believe is good for the game, as it gives players a choice to either stick with the full buy guns or buy more luxury scoped rifles. However, the devs thought that people were using it too much and nerfed both guns. The AUG was nerfed in 2019, having its fire rate reduced to 600 RPM and reduced the accuracy while unscoped. This significantly reduced the gun's popularity, and in April of 2020, they would increase the AUG's accuracy when unscoped, but reduce the accuracy while scoped. And in the same update where they buffed the AUG, they killed the SG553, reducing its fire rate from 666 to 545. Okay, kill is an exaggeration, as I still think the gun is okay today, but 545 RPM is crazy. This officially makes the SG 553 the slowest firing automatic weapon in the entire game. I think this nerf was a bit extreme. And yes, this is the end of all official buffs and nerfs, but I would also note that the fact spraying in CS2 without follow recoil really sucks. Kind of indirectly buffs the AUG and SG for anybody that doesn't use follow recoil. As in the video of YouTuber Bird, he shows that there is no longer a spark that shows where the bullet landed, making spraying a lot harder to do without a follow recoil. Since the AUG and SG are good for tap and short burst firing, this indirectly kind of makes them more useful. So I just wanted to add this in. But this brings us to today. What is the point of using the scope rifles now? If we take an objective look at the stats of the scoped rifles against the non-scoped ones, we can see that compared to their non-scoped counterparts, they deal slightly more damage to armored opponents due to their high penetration and are more accurate, but they have reduced fire rate, movement speed, and a significantly slower reload time, which is really annoying. So why are you paying so much money for a weapon that's worse than their full buy counterparts just for a scope? That's the question many players ask. The scope rifles are great for beginners who aren't used to non-scope shooting in Counter-Strike, but as you get better at the game, which I probably should do soon, you'll realize that the scope actually has a lot of downsides to it. First off, when you scope, you severely reduce your field of view, meaning that you won't be able to see enemies coming from angles that are too far to the left or right of you. So if you're always aiming out on the sight, you'll be unable to notice things happening around you more often. You'll have a lot of tunnel vision. Second off, aiming down sights as fast as it is still requires time for you to not only click, but to aim down the sights too. It's very small, but can easily be the difference between winning the gunfight and losing it badly. You'll notice in my gameplay, as I start to get used to both guns, I actually refrain from using the scope if I'm walking around tighter areas. Yes, I'm playing TDM, which is an obnoxious game mode where you have to react really fast to things, which is less common in the real game mode where you can usually tell where the enemy might be. But my point still stands, you cannot use your scope to react to an enemy that appears very suddenly. You'll get killed if you do this. Finally, the third disadvantage of having a scope is that if an enemy does appear when you're holding the angle, they will appear to be much faster than if you didn't have a scope, requiring a much faster reaction and more mouse movement. This can easily be negated by holding angles that are further back, but sometimes you can't do that. Also, peeker's advantage is a thing, so holding angles is not always advisable. So with all that being said, why would anybody pick up a gun that not only is weaker than main guns, but also has an attachment that isn't always useful? This is the question many players ask, and many people's answers are that they shouldn't. Some people even opt to remove them from their loadouts entirely, replacing the AUG for the more useful M4A1S, although it's harder to remove the SG, as there's nothing you really want to remove it for, unless you're an ass who uses the auto snipers. So are they too weak? In my opinion, yes, but there's also advantages to them that actually make me consider using them. As when recording my TDM footage, I actually started to grow towards these guns. Yes, I was suffering as the server was full of good players and I kept dying left and right, but the kills I got were very satisfying. You can use them as a slightly weaker gun with more accuracy when you're clearing your normal areas, but once you know there's a longer range angle that you're going to be clearing, you can scope in and then peek it, giving you a huge advantage over them as the scope makes it a lot easier when you peek. Yes, the M4 could do this too if you aim the gun right, but just the ease of aiming when you fight off such long angles really helps. While the M4 can deal with those ranges, the AUG and SG are more consistent at it due to the higher accuracy and scope. So if you really want to use these guns, make sure to plant yourself to fight long distance battles like Ramp in Mirage or B-Side to B-Stairs in Vertigo. Or if you want to be aggressive, make sure to rush out at those long distance fights with your scope out and try to pick off anyone you can see. Because of your scope, actually, you have a chance against snipers if you either pre-fire or react fast enough. Usually, since you don't have magnifications on the main guns, you can't really do this, but the scope gives you a much better chance, especially with the SG, which can one-tap head. Also, the recoil pattern is easier to handle on both guns, at least in my opinion. The only reason you see me missing all these sprays is because I don't use them very much. I'm sorry for the pain you're going through watching the footage, okay? I'm sorry. But yeah, the nice recoil patterns for both at least help. And almost forgot to mention, by the way, but since everybody is used to AKs and M4s, if you die with an AUG or SG in your hand and your teammate wants to pick it up, they're going to have a harder time. But this also works the other way around. It's if your enemies pick it up and they're not used to it, it might backfire on them. And another thing to note, the SG is a much better gun when used defensively. It's a slow firing but hard hitting bullets and scope. Make it very good for holding down points, but not so great in terms of attacking them. I said the SG was better than the AUG in my Galil video, but thinking about this, in hindsight, it really only is better if the CTs have it, making it actually slightly worse than the AUG in this regard. So yeah, that's something to think about. With all this being said, I find them in a place where they're a bit weak. I don't think they're really useless anymore, as I thought before recording this stuff, but I still think they're a bit niche. Yes, they're amazing at long ranges, and you can choose to fight in long ranges, and yes, long range situations are very common, but mid-range and close-range fights are also very common, and they are slightly worse at those than their normal counterparts. Also, you can't change the color of the scope anymore. What is wrong with you, Valve? Since you're paying more money for a trade-off rather than a full-on buff, I don't think they're too great. However, as someone has pointed out on Reddit, if you do better with a scope rifle, it's not a bad idea to just keep going with it. You should play your preference, as unless you're at the very top in terms of skill, the advantage you get from playing a gun you're familiar with is better than the advantage you get from using guns you're not comfortable with, but are slightly better, although this has exceptions. Now, I know people have mixed opinions on the AUG and SG. As someone I know says the AUG is the best gun in the game, and another says it's useless. So I'm trying to take the middle ground here and say that they're a bit on the weak end, and I don't like it. I've said this on the Galil vid, but why is it that M4s and AKs are the only ones that get to shine in this game? Why is it never another gun that people use a lot? I think both scope rifles should get changed. Here's what I think it should be. Alright, so you know how both the M4s and the AK are much better than the FAMAS and Galil, but they cost a lot more? I think this should be the same way with the AUG and SG, where they're a further upgrade to the main weapons. Although I think they should also cost significantly more. I think the AUG should be reverted to its version with 666 RPM and cost 3,600, or maybe it should be harder hitting and have a base damage of 32 instead. Either way, this gives it a clear advantage over the M4s. The SG should not be reverted to its version with 666 RPM, but change to 600 RPM, giving it an accuracy and damage boost compared to the AK, and also cost 3,300 instead of 3,000. And again, if the RPM isn't going to be buffed, increase the damage to 35 instead. Yes, I'm aware this makes the AUG 4-shot all range with a 1-tap headshot, and the SG 3 shots at all ranges, but that's what the added cost is for. They both still have some downsides with movement speed and reload speed, so don't think it's going to be 100%, just a fun upgrade of the main guns. Yes, I know I suggested extreme changes in the Galil video, but come on, I think making them upgrade M4s and AKs makes sense. But as always, I might be a bit crazy with these changes, so let me know what you guys think about them. And let me know what you think about the video and the guns in general. Do you think the scope rifle is in a good position right now? Should be buffed, or should they be kept as they are? Should they be nerfed? Okay, I hope you don't think this. Okay, I'm kidding. But yeah, that's it for the video. Next commentary video will probably be about the over nerfed and useless guns in CS, so stay tuned if you're interested. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe, and see you later.